The soldier returned after 730 days, buried deep behind the front lines, only to be paralyzed by what he saw. His little daughter tossed into a corner of the yard like discarded trash, while his wife, dressed in a pristine wedding gown, stood hand in hand with another man. But it took just one look, one single action from him, and the entire crowd fell silent. Not a soul dared speak. Clank. Ethan Walker pushed open the rusted blue iron gate, its hinges groaning like a warning. The two-story house he once called home appeared through the overgrown grass, now waist-high. No lights, no barking dog, not a trace of life. He stood there in silence. His hands still bore the calluses of war. Slung over his right shoulder was his worn-out military backpack, dangling like the weight of everything left unsaid. The cold wind sliced through his jacket, but Ethan didn't flinch. He just stared. The house was no longer a home. 3 steps forward, then he climbed the porch. Every window was shut tight, curtains drawn. He tried the front doorknob, locked. Ethan knocked 3 times, slow, firm. No answer. He stepped back and walked down the brick path. The same bricks he used to ride bikes on with his daughter. Now, they were covered in moss and scattered with debris. He circled to the back, following the narrow path along the fence. There it was, the room that once belonged to his daughter, Lily. The pale purple curtain still hung in the window. But it didn't flutter like it used to. Now it clung to the glass, stiff with dust and time. Ethan stepped back. He didn't call her name. He didn't pound on the door. He knew no one was there, not anymore. He returned to the front, stared one last time, then pulled out his phone. The screen read, "No signal." That didn't surprise him. During his 2-year special operation, personal devices were prohibited. No texts, no emails, no letters home. Only upon completion was he allowed to return. And now, the home he longed for was gone from his grasp. Click. The neighbor's gate creaked open. A young woman in her early 20s stepped out, holding a trash bag. She had loosely curled brown hair, wore jeans and a grey hoodie. When she saw Ethan, she froze. "Oh my gosh, you're Ethan, right?" she said, hesitating, eyes wide. He nodded. "Penny," she said quickly, setting the trash bag down. "I've been renting this place since April last year. The house next door's been empty for over a year now." Ethan looked at her, his voice low and rough. "Where's Julia?" Penny bit her lip, her eyes flickering with unease. She glanced around, as if afraid the wind might carry off whatever she was about to say. She left," Penny said quietly. "About a year and a half ago. Julia left her daughter with her sister. Said she'd come back, but no one ever saw her again." A cold gust swept across the porch, bringing with it the scent of the sea and a hint of salt. Ethan didn't move. His eyes narrowed, as if trying to grasp something that had just slipped through his memory. "Do you know why?" he asked, his voice dry, almost a whisper. "Why Julia left like that?" Penny was silent for a few seconds, then shook her head. "I'm not sure, just that she was very quiet. No one in the neighborhood really knew what was going on. Some folks said she was in trouble, others thought she was depressed, but no one really knew. She didn't talk to anyone." Ethan swallowed hard. The tightness in his throat ached. His chest felt heavy, as though the shards of a long-buried past had rushed back all at once, but this time there was no one left to blame. Penny looked at him with gentle sympathy. "The little girl's name was Lily, right?" she asked softly. "I saw her a few times. She'd sit alone on the front steps of Miss Clara's house, but it's been a while since I last saw her." "Who's Clara?" Ethan asked, urgency rising in his tone. "Julia's sister," Penny replied, more evenly now. "She lives in the old apartment complex, over by the migrant district. I've got the address. Hang on, I'll write it down for you." Penny hurried back inside, grabbing a pen and paper. Ethan remained still, arms hanging at his sides. There was no anger inside him, only a growing emptiness, stretching wider, threatening to swallow whatever was left. She returned and handed him the slip of paper. "Here, 36B Maple Street. If you need any more help—" Ethan nodded. "Thank you." He turned and slowly walked toward the old pickup parked on the curb. Penny called out after him, "You know, the little girl used to sit on those steps every evening, all by herself, hugging a teddy bear. One time, I asked why she didn't go inside. She just said, 'Auntie doesn't like noise.'" Ethan didn't turn around. He opened the car door, started the engine, and the vehicle slowly rolled away from the old street, a place that was once a home, now just a house, with no one left in it. Apartment 36B was part of an aging 3-story complex with no elevator. The hallway was narrow, the lights flickering like they were ready to give out. Ethan knocked on the exact door listed in the file. No answer. But he heard something. A faint sound. A soft rustling, like someone shifting inside. He knocked again, then pushed the door. It wasn't locked. Inside it was dark and messy. Snack wrappers scattered across the table, empty beer cans, a TV blaring sound with no picture. Ethan stepped in slowly. He didn't call out, just scanned the room quietly. Then he saw it. Under the dining table, tucked into the shadows beneath the wood, was a tiny head of brown hair, a small, curled-up body, and a pair of eyes wide open, dry, unblinking, staring straight at him. "Lily?" Ethan called, his voice low, soft as a breath. She didn't answer, just held tightly to a worn-out teddy bear, her head tilted ever so slightly. Ethan knelt down. He didn't come closer. He didn't push. The girl blinked, then whispered, "Daddy, did you come back for me?" He nodded, even though his throat tightened. "Yes, baby, it's me. Daddy's here. I came back for you." 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Lily slowly crawled out, still clutching the bear. No rush, no tears, just moving toward him, looking at him for a long, long moment. Ethan opened his arms, and for the first time in 2 years, the little girl stepped into her father's embrace. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to, and no one knew. It was after that hug that the worst was only just beginning to knock. The little girl didn't cry. She didn't say anything else either. She just held Ethan's hand tightly, as if letting go might make her father disappear. Apartment 36B was darker than he expected. A dim yellow light cast a hazy glow over a floor stained with watermarks. The air reeked of mildew, cigarette smoke, and cheap liquor, an atmosphere no child should have to breathe. Ethan sat down on the floor, still holding his daughter close. Lily rested her head on his chest, clutching a one-eared teddy bear to her body. He whispered, "Have you had dinner?" She gave a small shake of her head. It wasn't a clear answer, but it was enough. He stood up and lifted her in his arms. She was light as a pillow. Her legs didn't move. She just buried herself into his shoulder. The kitchen was bare. A box of cereal lay tipped on its side. Dishes were stacked in the sink. An old pizza box sat open on the counter. Inside, a few dried-up slices had curled at the edges with mold. He pulled out his phone. No signal. No data. No Wi-Fi. But he hadn't planned on calling anyone anyway. Opening a cabinet, he found a packet of instant noodles. That was it. Ethan set Lily down on the worn-out sofa, draped his jacket over her small frame, then stepped into the kitchen to boil water. She didn't ask anything, didn't look around, as if she'd already grown used to the cold stillness of this room. When he placed the bowl of steaming noodles on the table, Lily only looked at it. She didn't move, didn't react. "Try a bite. It's not great, but it's something," Ethan said, his voice soft, almost soothing. She reached for the spoon, lifted it slowly, and took a small bite carefully, cautiously. "What's your bear's name?" he asked. She finished chewing before answering. "Hushy. Mommy named him. She said he helps keep quiet for me when I'm sad." Ethan gave a slow nod. His throat tightened. He didn't blame the girl for saying that. Children don't lie. They only repeat what they're taught. The door creaked open. Ethan turned. A woman, probably in her 30s, stepped inside. Tank top, disheveled hair. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She was holding a bag of liquor. "What the hell? Who's there?" Her voice was rough, half surprised, half annoyed. Ethan stood up. "I'm Lily's father." Clara Sanders froze, then let out a dry laugh, like she'd just heard an old, tired joke. "Well, damn. Ethan? Thought you were off lost somewhere in Iraq or wherever the hell." "I was never gone," he replied, his posture steady, eyes fixed on hers. Clara tossed a half-empty liquor bottle onto the table. "Don't look at me like that." Julia dropped the kid off, said it'd be a few weeks, and vanished. "I've got my own life, you know?" "And what about her? What kind of life has she had here?" Ethan's voice was quiet, but the weight in each word slowed the air in the room. Clara pulled a cigarette from her bag, lit it, took a long drag. "You think this is easy? I've got a job, a boyfriend. Kids aren't something I signed up for." Ethan said nothing. He knelt down in front of Lily. "Do you want to come with me?" She looked up. There was no fear in her eyes, just something else. A quiet hope, like that question had echoed in her head for the past year. She nodded. "You're not going to leave me again, right?" Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "Number, I'm back now. And this time, I'm not going anywhere." He stood, lifting Lily into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tightly. No hesitation, no doubt. Clara let out a short, dry chuckle and leaned back against the wall. "Fine, take her. I don't care. But don't drag me into any court crap, got it?" Ethan didn't answer. He walked out the door, carrying his daughter, never once looking back. She laid her head on his shoulder, eyes slowly closing from exhaustion. In the car, Lily sat in the back seat, her small arms wrapped around the seatbelt. Ethan adjusted the rearview mirror, his eyes glancing up to meet hers. "Are you cold?" She shook her head. Ethan turned up the heat. A moment passed before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, Mum said, if I'm good, she'll come back to get me." Ethan didn't turn around. He simply replied, "You've been good. That's why I'm here to get you now." The car pulled away from the apartment complex and turned onto the boulevard. The city lights came on, street lamps casting long, faded streaks across the sidewalks, like blurred memories. Ethan glanced at Lily through the mirror once more. She had fallen asleep. The stuffed bear in her arms slipped gently onto her lap. And for the first time since coming home, he didn't feel empty inside. Not because he had found a place to return to, but because his daughter was still here. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching a one-eared teddy bear, her tiny face catching the fleeting glow of streetlights as the car rolled along. Ethan didn't turn on the radio. He needed the silence, the only thing holding his mind together after what he'd just witnessed. Clara had been right about one thing. That place wasn't a home. And Lily couldn't spend another night there. But then what? Where could Ethan take her? The old house had long since been rented out. He didn't even have the keys anymore. A hotel was out of the question, too loud, too cold for a child who'd just been abandoned. A few names drifted through his mind. Old friends, former teammates, but they'd all moved on, built new lives. In the end, Only one name surfaced like a lifeline in the dark. Thomas Lane, a former cop. Quiet, not the friendly type, but reliable, the kind of man who showed up when it mattered. Years ago, they'd buried a teammate together during their first deployment. Since then, they'd kept in touch, barely just enough for Ethan to know. If things ever went bad, Thomas wouldn't turn his back. Ethan pulled over to the side of the road, took out his phone. The screen lit up. Thomas's number was still in his contacts, saved under the initials. TL. He dialed. 1 ring. 2. Jesus, Ethan. I thought you were dead out there. Thomas's voice rasped, thick with sleep. Ethan got straight to the point. I've got a little girl with me. I need a place to crash. Just for tonight. Can you help? A beat of silence. Of course, my friend. 3rd floor. Doors unlocked. The old apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a peeling painted building, the hallway thick with the smell of long-standing dampness. Ethan carried Lily in his arms. The little girl was still asleep, her breathing steady, arms wrapped tightly around her father's neck. Door 3D was slightly ajar. Inside, the lighting was dim, the walls blotchy with age, but everything was clean, tidy in the way someone living alone for years would keep it. Thomas stood by the dining table, wearing a hoodie and sweatpants, a bottle of water in his hand. Put the girl on that bed. I've cleaned it, he said plainly, without small talk. Ethan nodded. He gently laid Lily down on the narrow bed pressed against the wall, slipped off her shoes, and pulled a thin blanket over her. She shifted slightly, but didn't wake. Her arms still clutched the stuffed bear like it was the only thing left from her old world. He walked back into the living room. Thomas had already placed a glass of water for him on the wooden table. She looks like you, Thomas said, his eyes never leaving the muted news broadcast on the TV screen. Ethan sat down in the chair, elbows resting on his knees, fingers tightly interlaced, as if trying to keep something from slipping through his mind. There's nowhere left to go, Thomas, he exhaled, his voice hoarse. The old house has someone else living in it now. Clara Julia's sister just left Lily, like she was some trash bag someone forgot on a doorstep. He paused, eyes drifting off into the distance. And Julia, I have no idea where she went. No note, no message, not a trace. Thomas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Are you sure Julia hasn't contacted anyone? Not a single family member, friend? Ethan shook his head. She disappeared like she never existed, but I don't buy that. You don't just abandon your child and vanish into thin air without a word, without even a shred of remorse. Thomas stepped in and took a seat across from him. Maybe she's still around, just doesn't want you to find her. Or maybe someone's helping her hide. Ethan looked up. You think someone else is involved? Could be, Thomas said, then paused. Wait. I remember Julia used to have a social media account, but she switched to a different number, more private. I actually helped her scrub a few things back when she was going through her last divorce. Ethan squinted. You still have the info? Thomas nodded and pulled his phone from his coat pocket, placing it on the table in front of Ethan. Here, still logged in. Take a look. If she's still using that number, you might find something. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone. But before unlocking it, he looked at Thomas and said slowly, I'm not trying to dig up the past. I need to know why that little girl had to suffer like that. Why Julia chose to disappear. And if there's still time. I want Lily to have an answer before she gets old enough to believe she was never worth loving. Thomas didn't say another word. He simply placed a hand gently on his friend's shoulder, a brief squeeze, but firm enough to carry weight. Go find your answers, Ethan. But don't forget, you're not alone anymore. He didn't ask anything else, just slid his phone across the table toward Ethan. Start here. If there's anything to find, this is where it begins. Ethan unlocked the phone, then typed in a name that hadn't appeared on any of his devices in 3 years, Julia Sanders. The account was still public, same name. The profile picture was a shot of Julia standing on the beach, wearing a white dress, hair flowing loosely. That smile hadn't changed except now. It wasn't for him anymore. He scrolled down, vague captions, pictures with friends, and then, almost time for something special. Just Chapter 2, Just Forever. The photo showed Julia in a bridal shop, draped in a white gown, a man's hand resting on her waist, both of them beaming, like the past had never existed. Mark Benson, CEO, divorced, no children, verified account, and clearly no idea Lily even existed. Thomas leaned in. "Is this the new guy?" Ethan nodded, but said nothing. His fingers moved slowly across the screen, pausing on another picture. One of the comments read, "That dress was made for you. Wishing you all the happiness in the world." Ethan handed the phone back to Thomas, his eyes suddenly shifting, as if something had just clicked. "Wait. I left Lily's teddy bear at Clara's place." He stood abruptly, fumbling for his car keys. "It's the only thing she's had with her since that night. If she sleeps without it, she startles awake in the middle of the night." Thomas nodded. "All right, go grab it and come back. If you need, I'll call ahead and let security know you're coming." Ethan shoved his phone into his pocket. "No need. I'll be in and out. I just don't want Lily to wake up and not see it beside her." Thomas watched him heading for the door and called out just as Ethan reached it. "Ethan, be careful, all right? I don't know why, but I've got a feeling. This isn't over." Ethan didn't answer, just raised a hand in acknowledgement. But those words wouldn't let go of him, because something about them felt true. And now, for the first time, he could feel it in the air. Something wasn't finished. Not yet. Ethan returned to apartment 36B just before midnight. The hallway lights were flickering non-stop. The door was just as he remembered unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped in quietly. Lying on the floor near the dining table was a cream-colored stuffed bunny. One ear was worn thin. She couldn't sleep deeply without it. Ethan knew that. He bent down to pick it up, and just then, a voice came from inside. A familiar voice. Clara was on the phone. He froze. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. "I told you already. Just go ahead and marry him. That guy doesn't have a clue. And the kid keeping her a few more months isn't hurting anyone. If it ever comes out, just say the ex-husband died in the war. End of story." Another woman's voice responded. "Julia. Clara. I'm scared this will come back to haunt us. If someone finds out, then blame Ethan. Who the hell even knows if he's alive? It's been 3 years, for God's sake. Why are you still worrying?" Ethan stood still. He didn't step forward, didn't say a word. He simply held the bunny in his hand, turned around, and quietly closed the door behind him, as if he'd never been there. Back at apartment 3D, the lights were still off. Lily was asleep. Thomas sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee, one hand holding the mug, the other toying with a lighter. "Did you get it?" Thomas asked. Ethan nodded. He sat down on the sofa and placed the stuffed bunny gently on the table. After a pause, he spoke slowly. "She didn't shoot me to leave me behind." Thomas looked up. She did it." With silence. A long silence followed. Thomas didn't press for details, but he understood. The way Ethan clenched his hand, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the darkness, it said everything. "You want to dig into this?" Thomas asked. Ethan nodded. "I need to know everything." Thomas stood, opened his laptop. "She wants to live like the past never existed. Then let's show her the past knows how to find its way back." He typed quickly, pulled up a stream of images. One photo appeared, Julia trying on a wedding dress, Mark pinning flowers in her hair. both of them smiling. Thomas turned the screen toward him. Ethan looked. He said nothing, but for the first time since he came home, his eyes lit with fire. Not pain, but clarity. The pristine white wedding gown swept gently across the polished wooden floor as Julia turned before the full-length mirror. Lace hugged her slender shoulders, and the skirt flared just enough to hide everything she wanted hidden. "This dress really makes you stand out," the store attendant said, with a satisfied smile, smoothing the back of the gown with her hand. Julia didn't reply. She stared at her own reflection, as if trying to see through the layers of fabric and find someone else, someone without an old name, without a past, without a child. Outside the fitting room, Amanda Green, her bridesmaid and best friend since college, sat with her legs crossed, scrolling through the news on her phone. "You picked the right one. It looks beautiful and classy," Amanda said, without looking up. Julia gently tugged at the hem of the dress and stepped out, adjusting her posture. "I guess so." She didn't need more compliments. What she needed was a sense of safety. And in this white dress, she could almost believe that everything outside had been locked away behind her. "Where's Mark?" Julia asked, scanning the room. "Meeting at the venue," Amanda replied curtly. Just then, a resort receptionist stepped in, holding a plain white envelope with no return name. "Miss Julia, someone asked me to give you this." Julia furrowed her brow slightly and took it. She opened it as soon as the staff member left. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in firm, deliberate letters. "Your daughter still waits for you every night." She froze for several seconds. No signature, no trace of who had sent it. But each word sliced through the fragile calm she'd been clinging to like a thin blade. Julia folded the paper quickly, slipped it into her purse, and hurried back inside. "What was that?" Amanda called after her. "Nothing." Amanda stood up and followed, suspicion written all over her face. "Come on, Julia. You think I didn't notice your hand shaking?" "That letter... Does it have something to do with Ethan?" Julia tightened her grip on the strap of her purse. "Don't mention that name here." "Did you tell Mark everything?" Amanda stepped in front of her, not backing down. "There's nothing to tell. You have a child. You had a husband. You had a whole part of your life that you buried just because you were afraid Mark might find out. Do you really think all of it will disappear just because you pretend it never existed?" Julia lifted her head, her voice colder than usual. "Mark doesn't need to know about any of that. My past is mine to carry." Amanda stared at her, then said slowly, "It's not that Mark doesn't need to know. It's that you don't have the courage to face it." Silence. Julia turned away without another word, but her face had shifted, softened in that unmistakable way of someone who'd just been struck right in the heart. Late afternoon. Julia sat alone in the dressing room. She unlocked her phone to check work emails, then absently scrolled through her inbox. There was an image file. No sender, no subject, no address. She tapped it. It was a drawing, 3 figures in crayon, one tall, one medium, and a little girl in the middle with a bow on her head. Under each figure, scribbled letters read, "Daddy, Mommy, me." Julia knew it instantly. It was Lily's drawing. The little girl had drawn it just before Julia left that old house. Back then, Julia had taken nothing with her but a suitcase full of clothes and a promise that she would return. She never did. Julia's eyes blurred with tears. She gently touched the phone's screen on it. A photo had just gone viral on a local news site. It showed Lily hugging Ethan on a beach. The little girl's smile was radiant, like sunlight. Ethan stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his gaze so tender it took Julia's breath away. She started to delete the photo, but her finger froze, suspended between two choices: delete or save. In the end, she simply turned off the screen. No deletion, no saving. Because how could she erase something she was the one who abandoned? Old memories stirred like a quiet rain tapping against a window pane. Back then, when Ethan joined the military, Julia stayed behind alone in a small rented apartment tucked inside a cold, unfeeling city. She had gotten pregnant with Lily far too young, no close relatives, no steady income, and did whatever odd jobs she could find just to scrape by. But the months with Ethan away felt endless. No letters, no phone calls long enough to speak her fears, and no promises from him that he'd return soon. Julia didn't hate Ethan, she just panicked. One night, when Lily came down with a high fever, Julia carried her to the hospital in the dead of night, her legs trembling, a Ziploc bag full of coins clutched in her hand. She still remembered the nurse asking, "Where's the father?" and how all she could do was stay silent. After that night, loneliness turned into fear. So when Clara, her older sister, offered to watch Lily for a while so Julia could get back on her feet, she said yes. And never came back. She was afraid that returning would only cause Lily more pain. Afraid Ethan might come back and find nothing but a worn-out mother, a woman who had failed. And more than anything, Julia believed, if she stayed gone long enough, Ethan would forget her. And in time, so would Lily. The child would grow up without remembering the woman who walked away. But now, seeing Lily's eyes in that photograph, not angry, not bitter, just calm, Julia realized something. She hadn't been replaced. She'd been left behind, and the most painful part was, it had been her choice. That night, Mark came home from his meeting. Julia had already changed into a dress, makeup done, a glass of red wine in her hand, as if nothing had happened. "Are you free tomorrow?" she asked, while pouring him another glass. "Busy in the morning, but maybe free in the afternoon. What's up?" "I want to look at wedding cakes again. I still haven't found the right flavor." Mark smiled. "Sure, I'll move some things around." Julia nodded, returning a faint smile. But inside, she felt like she was held together by tight rubber bands, ready to snap at any second. Later that night, she sat alone in the living room. The space was luxurious, warm, but couldn't quiet the storm inside her mind. She pulled out a folded paper from her wallet and stared at the handwriting one more time. No signature, but Julia knew Ethan was out there, and maybe he was getting close. She struck a lighter and held the flame to the corner of the paper. Fire flared up, devouring the letter within seconds. Julia thought she'd erased the last trace. But what she didn't know was that a small ceiling-mounted security camera in the corner of the room had recorded the entire moment. The arrival of the letter, her trembling eyes, and the hand that struck the flame. A silent video. But to Mark, the man whose name wasn't mentioned in any of her words, it would be the clearest confession of all. Ethan quietly closed the trunk of the car. The early afternoon sunlight slanted across the peeling walls of the house he once called home. The three-bedroom house on the corner of Riverstone had been the place where he first laid Lily down in her crib. Now, it stood hollow like a memory fading into fog, except for a few cardboard boxes filled with files and some dusty old toys Clara hadn't bothered to take. Thomas stepped out of the car behind him, carrying a document bag and a small voice recorder. "You really think you'll find anything here?" he asked. Ethan gave a slight nod. "I need medical records, the original birth certificate, anything that proves I was ever a part of her life." Thomas glanced around. Clara didn't change the locks. Number. She never considered this place hers. The old door opened without resistance. The house was silent, as if no one had ever lived there. The smell of dampness rose from the carpet. On the wall of the living room, a small note still clung to the paint. Lily's vaccination schedule, age 3. Ethan stepped inside, his every movement heavy with the weight of the past. He didn't know what he hoped to find, but he feared what he might. Nearly an hour later, as Thomas was sifting through a stack of old documents, Ethan heard a knock at the door. He answered. Standing there was an older woman, small in stature, silver hair tucked neatly, holding a cloth tote bag and a handful of children's books. She looked up, her eyes a mix of surprise and deep emotion. "Ethan Walker?" He blinked. "Yes? I'm Mrs. Langford. I was Lily's preschool teacher. I didn't expect to see you here. I just came by to return some books Lily used to love. She insisted on borrowing them back then." Ethan invited her in and made her a cup of tea. A few minutes later, they sat across from each other in the worn-out kitchen. "There was one time," she began softly, "I called the Guardian your late wife's sister after I saw Lily waiting outside the school gate for over an hour and a half with no one coming to pick her up." Her voice dropped. "I thought about keeping her in for lunch. But Lily just shook her head and sat under the tree, hugging her teddy bear. She didn't cry, didn't complain, just sat there in silence." Ethan bowed his head, his hands tightening around each other. "I wasn't there. But you are now," she said gently. "Don't let someone else write the rest of the story." She stood, reached into her bag, and pulled out a small folder. "These are copies of the letters I sent to your old address. You probably never received them. There's also a photo from her birthday last year, taken at the school." Ethan took the folder. His eyes paused at a photo of Lily wearing a paper crown, standing beside a small cake. Surrounded by classmates and teachers, her gaze still seemed distant, as if searching for someone. He thanked Mrs. Langford with a firm handshake and stood silently as she walked away. Only one thought echoed in his mind. She never stopped waiting for me. Thomas was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the master bedroom, rifling through old drawers. "Found something worth a look," he called out. Ethan walked over. Thomas handed him a thick envelope labeled, "Notarized copy, custody agreement." Ethan opened it. Inside was a notarized copy of a guardianship authorization bearing the signatures of Julia and a man named Alden Chase, an attorney specializing in divorce and custody cases. The date of signing, "That's 7 months after I deployed," Ethan murmured, doing the math. Thomas said, "So she waited until she was sure you weren't coming back before filing the paperwork. But that's not all." He pulled out another stack of documents, including a copy of the birth certificate. Ethan examined it closely. The father's name was originally listed as Ethan Walker, but it had been crossed out in red ink, and next to it, someone had written by hand, "Unknown." Ethan froze. "This isn't legal," Thomas said. "You can't just erase a father's name from a birth certificate unless there's a court order or a death certificate." He handed over another note. "She used a loophole, something called a voluntary maternal declaration to amend vital records. It's signed off by Shelley Brown, the county registrar." "Want to contact her?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Call her. Now." Thomas switched the phone to speaker mode. After 3 rings, someone picked up. Shelley speaking. "Hi, this is Thomas Lane. I'm reviewing some documents related to a vital records filing you certified back in 2020. The case concerns a woman named Julia Sanders and her daughter, Lily Sanders." There was a pause on the other end, just a few seconds before the woman replied briskly, "I can't discuss this over the phone. If you'd like, you can meet with me in person. but bring a court order or legal representation." Thomas glanced at Ethan and ended the call, then said quietly, "She's scared of being implicated." That means something shady definitely went down. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the old birth certificate in his hands, the name Ethan Walker slashed through. He didn't cry. He just gripped the paper until it crumpled in his fists. "My daughter may not need my name," he said softly, "but she needs to know I never walked away from her." It was already dark by the time Ethan and Thomas left the house. A cold wind swept through, carrying the stale, dusty scent of years long buried. Just before getting into the car, Ethan paused. He looked into the side mirror, his eyes red, but steady. "Thomas." "What?" "I'm not going to that wedding to make a scene," he said, voice calm but sharp as steel. "I'm going to look her in the eye and let my daughter see her father standing tall." That morning, Ethan bent down to tie Lily's shoelaces in front of the tailor's shop. The little girl stood still, obedient in her light beige hoodie dress, clutching a freshly washed teddy bear in her hands. Her face looked noticeably brighter than it had in days past. "Do you like this color?" the clerk asked, holding up a swatch of creamy white silk. Lily gave a small nod. "It looks like the bride's dress I saw in a movie." Ethan stood up, glanced at his daughter, then turned to the clerk. "Make a simple one, knee-length, short sleeves. I'll pay now." By midday, while Lily sat outside enjoying an ice cream cone, Ethan walked into a nearby men's tailor to try on a suit. The mirror reflected a tall, broad-shouldered man whose eyes still carried an undeniable weariness. But this time, the look in them was no longer lost. He adjusted the collar, straightened the cuffs, then turned to the tailor. "Could you sew a small pocket inside the jacket?" he asked. "I want to tuck an envelope in there." The shop owner smiled. "Most folks put a ring in there, but if it's a letter, I'd guess it means something big." Ethan didn't answer. He only offered a faint, quiet smile. At that same moment, nearly 100 miles away, at the Silver Pines Resort, a van of fresh flowers was being unloaded. Staff moved briskly with clipboards and walkie-talkies, while laughter and chatter echoed from the third-floor dressing room, where the bridesmaids were gathered. In the center of the mirror-filled room, Julia stood trying on a mermaid-style wedding gown. She looked perfect, at least, in the mirror, but inside, her heart was in turmoil. "Did you sleep okay last night?" Amanda asked. Julia nodded, but her hand tightened around the lace on the dress. "Still nervous?" She didn't answer. Then came a knock at the door. A hotel staff member entered with a small ivory gift box, no sender's name. Just a single line handwritten on the lid. "Your daughter still waits for you every night." Julia froze. She slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a pale pink hair clip, a cheap plastic one. One of the small things she had once bought for Lily when the girl was 3. The same clip that used to get tangled in Lily's hair every time Julia rushed to fix it. And then, one day she'd left it behind, just like she had left everything else. "What is it?" Amanda approached. Julia quickly closed the box. "Nothing, just a little gift." But the tears in her eyes gave her away. Elsewhere in the resort, Enid Benson-Mark's mother sat in the reading room, scrolling through her tablet. The name Julia Sanders had been searched 3 times. She said nothing to her son, but what she'd found, particularly a civil record marked with a revision stamp, made her brow furrow. She had once run a non-profit organization that supported single mothers. She knew all too well. When a woman chooses to bury her past, it's usually because that past isn't clean. In the dressing room, long after everyone else had left, Julia sat alone on the bench. Light from the window pane reflected softly off the large mirror. Her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "I stayed quiet today. Tomorrow I won't." Attached was a photo. Ethan was holding Lily's hand, standing in front of the old house in Riverstone. Lily was looking up at her father with a gaze Julia hadn't seen in over 2 years. Julia's hand trembled. She reached for a butane lighter tucked inside her makeup bag, flicked it on, and burned the note. But she had no idea the security camera in the room had recorded her every move. Down the hallway, Amanda stood frozen, having accidentally caught the footage playing on the central monitor. At the same moment, Ethan stood beneath the trees outside the resort. Dusk had fallen. Warm yellow lights spilled from the third-floor suite where Julia was trying on her wedding dress, casting a golden glow over the building, making it look like a picture out of a luxury catalogue. But he didn't step forward. Lily stood beside him, dressed in a freshly ironed dress, crisp white ballet flats, and her newly trimmed hair tied with a pale pink ribbon. Ethan gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Are you scared?" Lily looked up. "No," she whispered, "because today you're here." He bent down and kissed her forehead, then reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded document. Petition for legal custody reinstatement. There was one blank line at the bottom. Ethan pulled out a pen and signed his name, Ethan Walker, then carefully folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into his chest pocket. He looked at the resort one last time. Tomorrow, the invitation would reach the right hands. And this time, he wouldn't be arriving empty-handed. The piano played soft, drifting notes, floating through the air like a wisp of smoke. Outside the resort chapel, a gentle breeze rustled the pine trees, causing the white ribbons tied to the decorative posts to sway lightly. Inside the chapel, bathed in warm golden light, the guests had all gathered. Down the center aisle, a carpet of fresh rose petals stretched in a delicate path. The bridesmaids were already in place. Mark Benson, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, stood facing the pastor, a restrained smile on his lips that couldn't quite hide the tension in his eyes. Then, the chapel doors opened. Julia entered. Her pure white wedding dress trailed behind her. Her hair was pulled into an elegant bun, adorned with a small pearl-colored floral crown. She didn't glance to either side. She couldn't. Every step forward felt like a thorn pressing into her skin. Mark extended his hand. Julia gave a slight nod, her hand trembling, but she smiled nonetheless. Pastor Caleb Moore stepped forward, his voice deep and warm. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Mark Benson and Julia Sanders in the sacred bond of marriage." No one inside the chapel noticed. Outside, beneath the tree by the chapel's entrance, a man was standing. Ethan. Beside him stood Lily, dressed in a simple white dress, holding a small teddy bear in her arms. Father and daughter stood close, their eyes fixed on the chapel's stained glass window, watching every movement inside. The pastor continued, "Before we move to the most solemn part of this ceremony, I must ask one final question, both as a tradition and as a reminder of honesty." He turned toward the room. "If anyone here objects to this marriage for any valid reason, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The room fell still, not a sound, until a voice rang out, firm, clear, without a microphone. "I object." Every head turned. At the far end of the aisle, Ethan stepped in. One hand held Lily's, the other carried a white envelope. He didn't rush. Each step was steady, deliberate, like it had all been decided long ago. Julia froze. Mark turned to her, his face draining of color. The guests began to murmur. The pastor paused, lowering his head slightly. Ethan reached the front row, then stopped. He didn't shout. He wasn't angry. He simply looked down at his daughter, then raised his head and said, "This little girl, she's hers, and mine." Julia couldn't breathe. Ethan pulled 2 documents from the envelope. One was a DNA test result, the other a guardianship petition. He placed them gently on the wooden stand in front of him. "This is legal confirmation," he said. Then he turned to Lily. The little girl opened a small pouch and pulled out a crayon drawing 3 people, a man, a woman, and a child standing between them. Ethan continued, his voice calm and deliberate. She drew her mum, her dad, herself, and then she asked me, "When is Mommy coming back to marry Daddy?" Julia took a step back. Mark snapped, "You have a child?" "You never told me." Julia trembled but forced herself to stay composed. "I had one, but her father passed away." Ethan lifted his head. "I never disappeared. You just never said my name." The entire room went silent, as if someone had pulled the plug on the world. The pastor quietly stepped aside and set down his Bible. Mrs. Enid rose from her seat, walked past Julia without a word, leaving behind only a solemn nod and a cold, cutting disappointment. Amanda, the maid of honor, slowly removed her heels, set her bouquet on the ground, and walked off the stage barefoot. Her steps across the flower-strewn aisle felt more like a funeral than a wedding. Julia could barely stay on her feet. Her eyes began to well up, but Ethan didn't move any closer. He just stood there, still holding his daughter's hand. "I didn't come here to ruin a wedding," he said, his voice low but firm. The entire chapel fell into a tense stillness, broken only by the anxious breathing of the guests. Ethan took one step forward, eyes locked on Julia, the woman in a pristine white dress, now visibly shaken. "I came..." He paused, swallowing back the weight of his words. "So, my daughter could see who her mother really is." He looked at Lily standing beside him, her white dress fluttering gently in the breeze from the open window. Then he turned back to Julia this time. His gaze cut through every layer of pretense she'd wrapped herself in. "You can leave me. You can start over. You have the right to choose a different path," he said, his voice steady, each word falling like stone. "But you never had the right to abandon a child. You left her like an old piece of luggage when she needed you most. And now, here you are, in a wedding dress, standing like none of it ever happened." The crowd was stunned. Julia stumbled back a step, her lips trembling. "Lily didn't come here to beg," Ethan continued. "She just needed to see her mother once, not in a picture, not through someone else's story, with her own eyes, from her own heart." His voice softened as he turned slightly toward Lily, then looked back up one last time. "You can tell the world whatever you want, but don't expect her to believe it if you don't have the courage to look her in the eye right now." No one in the chapel said a word. That line, plain, honest, unvarnished, hit harder than any slap. It cut through makeup, lace, and all the polished lies. Mark ripped off his tie and stormed out. Julia sank to her knees, but no tears came. Ethan bent down, straightened Lily's dress, and gently asked, "Ready to go home?" Lily looked at her mother, but Julia wouldn't meet her gaze. The girl turned her head and nodded. "Daddy, are we going home now?" Ethan smiled and gently kissed his daughter's forehead. "Yes, let's go home." Father and daughter turned and walked out of the chapel, never looking back. The doors closed quietly behind them, leaving behind a wedding no one wanted to finish, and a mother who could never erase the look in her child's eyes. The final sound of the wedding was the door closing. Then, only silence. No applause, no laughter, no toasts or well-wishes. The wedding didn't end, it was simply abandoned. The microphone on the altar was still on, crackling with faint static and broken echoes. Overhead lights dimmed one by one. Waitstaff quietly pulled linens from the tables. Guests hurried out of the chapel without saying goodbye. No one asked about the bride. No one said, "Congratulations." Inside the dressing room, Julia sat collapsed on the floor. Her wedding dress was wrinkled, Mascara streaked down her cheeks. At some point, her heels had been kicked off. The vanity mirror reflected the face of a woman who had lost not because someone else was better, but because she had betrayed everything she once believed in. She buried her face in her hands, breathing like she couldn't catch air. Outside, Mark walked past Julia without stopping. His gaze was cold as steel. He left only one sentence behind, low enough for no one but her to hear. "I'm not marrying a lie." You didn't just hide your past, you denied it. You left your daughter like she never existed. He took a step back. And what if you planned to do the same to my child? A knock at the door. Julia didn't answer. It opened. Amanda stood there, the maid of honor, her closest friend since college. She was in her street clothes now, holding a USB drive and a paper envelope. No polite smile, no look of sympathy. "This is a copy from the security camera," Amanda said, placing it on the table. "The scene where you burned the papers. I kept it because I'm not sure anymore if I was a witness or an accomplice." Julia screamed, "I've lost everything. What more do you want from me?" Amanda didn't reply. She turned to leave, but then she paused and spoke softly, like letting go. "You didn't lose it because they took it. You lost it because you left it behind." Not far away in the tea room, Ethan stood with Thomas and attorney Margot Kane. Julia entered barefoot, clutching the torn edge of her dress, her expression half mad. "Ethan, please, don't release the video. Don't sue me. Let me keep at least a shred of dignity." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked into her eyes, no hatred, no pity, only the end. "You don't need to destroy me, Julia. I've already done that myself." Margot Kane slid a folder across the table toward Julia. "The temporary restraining order has been approved by the court. As of this moment, you're not allowed within 100 meters of Lily." Julia stepped back as if she'd been slapped. "No, this can't be." "You can appeal," Margot added, "but Lily will be protected, and Ethan has already filed for official custody." Thomas stepped forward, holding a birth certificate with the line, "Father Ethan Walker," crossed out. You can't erase someone from her life with a stroke of a pen. The back door creaked open. Penny Munro, the former nanny who once cared for Lily, walked in with Lily by her side. The little girl stood behind Penny, not moving forward. When Julia reached out her hand, her voice trembling, "Lily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Lily took a step back, hiding behind Penny's skirt. No tears, no words, just one look so full of disappointment, it made the whole room feel heavier. Julia dropped to her knees, sobbing, "I didn't want to lose her. I just didn't want to lose my chance to start over." No one answered. Outside, the rain began to fall. Amanda stood beside Penny, staring through the clear glass as she watched Julia sit alone in what was once meant to be a wedding room, surrounded by a grey-white gown and the broken shards of memory. She whispered, "Now I understand. Not everyone who wears white is truly a bride." 1 month later, the town of Esperanza was no more than a smudge of blue ink on the map, a place where the sea breeze didn't shout, where sunrises arrived without hurry, and every road eventually led back to the waves. No car horns, no meeting schedules, only the scent of salt in the air, blending gently with wild lavender blooming along the wooden fence. At the end of a sandy path, nestled on a breezy hillside, stood a small wooden house painted soft blue. Its weathered roof had faded under years of sun. The walls were draped in white blossoms, and the windows stood open to catch the morning light. Inside a cozy corner room, Lily sat quietly, head bent over her sketchpad. The early sunlight filtered through the white curtains, resting gently on her neatly braided brown hair. Her tiny hand gripped a paintbrush, and her eyes were as clear as a summer lake. Today's painting showed a house with 3 windows, a green lawn, the ocean rising behind it, and a sparkling sky above. In the top corner, in uneven handwriting, she had written, "Daddy and me's home." No one had told her to. No one had taught her that. Since coming here, Lily had slowly begun to remember how to smile. Her new school mirrored this gentle place, kind and unhurried. Esperanza Elementary, with its wildflower-covered yard and small pastel-colored classrooms, was a school where every teacher knew each child by name. That morning, Mrs. Langford, Lily's former kindergarten teacher, had stopped by to drop off a few boxes of donated books. She passed by classroom 1B and suddenly halted. Through the glass, she saw a little girl sitting by the easel, her head tilted, giggling with the classmate beside her. It was Lily, the same little girl who used to stand for hours outside the school gate with no one coming to pick her up. The one who never spoke, never smiled, and drew nothing but grey smudges. But today, on her canvas, was a man with brown hair, a little girl in a dress, and behind them, a giant wave washing away everything old. And for the first time in all those years, Mrs. Langford saw a real smile on Lily's face. Late afternoon. The sunlight tilted across the eaves of a small house. Ethan sat on an old wooden chair, holding a crumpled handwritten letter, thin paper, slanted handwriting. "Ethan, if I could do it all over again. I wish I had the courage not to walk away from you and our daughter. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just, please don't let her grow up thinking her mother never loved her." He read the final line, then folded the letter. No tears, no tremble, no reply. He simply placed the letter gently in the drawer beneath the table, not close to his heart, but not discarded either. He had learned, finally, not to let the past scrape against the present anymore. Penny Monroe stepped onto the porch, her hands covered in soil, sleeves rolled high, adding a few sprigs of lavender to the planter by the steps. Lily came bursting out of the house, holding a small ceramic plate. "Miss Penny, I made cookies today, but we didn't have any vanilla. Will you come back tomorrow?" Penny laughed, wiping her hands on her apron, voice light as a breeze. "I'll bring vanilla and some mint too." Lily threw her arms around her waist, whispering, "You're my brown-haired fairy." Ethan stood nearby, watching quietly, like a man who had walked through a storm and was finally seeing sunlight again. Penny caught his gaze. It was gentle, not binding, not promising, just grateful, as if peace had a shape, it would be this very moment. Ethan sat on the porch steps, sunlight slanting over his shoulder, one hand slowly tracing the chipped rim of his teacup. "I didn't think I'd ever feel happy again," he said softly, almost in a whisper, "until I stopped waiting for someone else to give it to me." Penny didn't answer. She simply looked at him, long and quiet. Because sometimes the rarest gift isn't advice, it's presence. That night, Ethan read with Lily. She sat curled in his lap, hair smelling of sun, her voice fading in and out from sleepiness. When they reached the last page, Lily looked up. "Daddy, can I take my painting to school tomorrow?" "Of course." "Which one?" "The one with you and me, and the ocean waves. Teacher said we could bring a picture if we have a happy family." Ethan looked at her. There was no more flinching in her eyes, no fear lurking in the silence between them. Only trust, pure, steady, like sand holding footprints firm. He nodded and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Somewhere far off, in the big city, Julia sat alone on a cold leather couch. The wedding dress had been returned, the ring never worn. On the table lay an old photo of Lily, pulled from a storage box. No calls, no visitors. The apartment was so quiet she could hear the tick of the clock, like silent verdicts echoing in her chest. She had thought about coming back asking for visitation, had written a letter, waited. But in the end, she never sent it. Because not everyone gets a second chance, especially not after tearing apart something sacred with their own hands. Julia looked out through the glass door. The ocean was out there, but too far to hear the waves. She began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just tears with no clear place to fall. The next morning, the sky was a clear blue. Lily tugged her father's hand down toward the beach. The breeze was soft, the sand warm. Waves lapped gently at their feet. Two sets of footprints, one small, one large, wove together like notes in a song never written. Lily ran ahead, laughter ringing bright. Ethan followed, his gaze no longer heavy. Suddenly, Lily turned around, spread her arms wide, like she was hugging the sky, and shouted, her voice bursting into the wind, "I have a daddy now!" Ethan stopped. His eyes stung. Something inside him broke open, not pain, but something else. Something called living. He ran forward and scooped her into his arms. They sat together in the sand, hands intertwined, eyes fixed on the sun rising from the edge of the sea. The ocean didn't ask questions, didn't judge. It just embraced those brave enough to begin again. It was a quiet morning. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow across the modest rented room where Julia sat alone at a wooden table. The small apartment was on the second floor of a worn-down building, in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the wedding halls, white dresses, and once boisterous blessings that had filled her life. The only sound was the faint scratching of pen against paper, a handwritten letter, composed by fingers that trembled from having hesitated too many times. "My dear child, I'm sorry." She wrote each word as if laying down a lifetime of weariness onto the page. No embellishments, no excuses. No attempt to resurrect the image of the mother she once might have been. Just Julia, someone who had once walked away, now searching for a way back, even if it was too late. Inside the envelope, she included an old hair tie, the very one Julia used to tie up her little girl's hair each morning before school. It was faded now, but still carried a faint scent of flowers. Alongside it was a birthday card with a picture of a bunny on the front, bought many years ago, never sent. She sealed the envelope. On the front, she wrote, "To Lily, if you want to open it. No return address. No name." Meanwhile, in the coastal town of Esperanza, the soft morning sun brushed across the pale blue rooftops as Ethan stepped out of the local post office. In his hands was a large envelope, its pink cover hand-decorated. A house, 3 hearts, a man, and a little girl beneath them. A scrawled message, "For Mom." He opened it right there on the steps. A drawing, a short letter, with no bitterness. "Mum, I'm okay. I'm not waiting anymore. I drew a new house, but I still keep the old one, because I used to live there. I used to wait for you to come back. But now, I don't need you to come back to be happy. I just need to know you once loved me, your daughter, Lily." Ethan clenched the paper in his hand. No sobs escaped, just a quiet shimmer in his eyes, not for Julia, but for Lily, for the quiet kind of growing up that no child should ever have to do. He returned home. Julia's letter was placed on the table, but he didn't give it to Lily, not out of anger, but because Ethan understood. Some memories shouldn't be reopened at the wrong time. They need to be kept safe until the one who carries them is ready. That evening, Lily sat by the window. The sunset painted her cheeks a gentle orange. In her hands was an old teddy bear, the only friend who had witnessed all the years of waiting. She didn't cry, She didn't ask questions. She just looked out at the sea, her hair catching the last golden rays of the day. A circle had closed, not with a knock at the door, or with words of forgiveness, but with silence. A soft silence, just enough to begin a new life without carrying the weight of the past. Ethan sat behind his daughter, quiet, like a promise that no longer needed to be spoken. In their small world, no one was forced to forgive, but everyone had the chance to let go. We all make mistakes, but not everyone has the courage to face the consequences. And fewer still are lucky enough to be given a second chance to make things right. The story of Ethan, Lily, and Julia is a powerful reminder that true love doesn't live in pretty promises, it lives in action. In the choice not to walk away, in the choice not to stay silent when someone needs you the most. What do you think of Ethan's decision? If you were Lily, would you be willing to forgive? And if you were Julia, would you have the courage to step back into the past, just to ask for acknowledgement? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Did today's story remind you of someone in your life? If you're raising a child or fighting to hold a family together, please know you're not alone. I hope you're safe, holding strong, and if you ever need a place to be heard, feel free to share in the comments below. We're here not to judge, but to remember, everyone deserves a chance to be loved all over again.